Okay, so we're going to take it a little bit into the how to. Oh, this is my manager. My daughter. She's. We have out of 8. There's 4 mental health professionals.
Mhm. 5 really. Mental health, social work, psychology, therapist,
Yeah, HR
community.
executive, and um, what is Grace?
Aerospace engineer.
Yes, yes,
We don't know where she came from.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And Rafiki's our family business. We do a lot of consulting and training all over the place with that. And my late wife was a social worker also,
Mhm.
who originally was supposed to be doing this with us at when this was planned for 2020. So, but she's around, I assure you.
Mhm.
Okay, so want to start by putting a little context on things, a little context. And where I like to start is with worldviews. A lot of this work was done by brother Edwin Nichols, um, and basically said there are 2 major worldviews that most of the conceptualization comes out of. There's many worldviews, but these 2 represent the extremes. And one is called linear, Western, or Eurocentric, and another is called relational, um, Eastern, Afrocentric. Mhm. So, um, linear is based in what's called modernism, which is about objectivity. In order for something to be real, I have to be able to demonstrate it at will and show it to you. Mhm. Uh, Direct cause and effect. Everything has a cause and has an effect, and out of that comes universal truth. The whole issue of empiricism comes out of that. And it was, in many ways, modernism was a response to the superstition of the Middle Ages. So it's about let's get things clear and clear statement of the facts. But that's one way of looking at things. Now, linear is where most of our systems are based. And say in order for something to be real, it has to be able to shown at will and verified by other folks. Okay. But that's not the only way of understanding things. A more relational view is postmodernism, which says there's some things and sometimes when one has to believe one's own experience. Mhm. I mean, for those of you who might believe in a higher power, it's not because somebody told you or did an empirical test and proved that it was there, because you had some experience inside to say, yes, there's some other intelligence higher than me that's doing this. So a relational view says, believe what you experience. It says, believe what you experience. And instead of having singular causes, things have multiple causes. So instead of ADHD being all genetic, you might include in that it's representative of a learning style. It might be influenced by one's diet. It might be influenced by the parenting. There are multiple causes for everything according to a relational model. And everything is relative. So it's not about universal truths, but everything is relative. So 2 different ways of looking at things. Is one right and one wrong? We'll see. According to the linear point of view, though, everything goes in one category or another. It's dichotomous. Either it's black, white, right, wrong, in, out, like that. But according to a diunital point of view, everything exists on a continuum. Anything that is in any of us is in all of us to one degree or another. Familiar with Myers-Briggs and those kind of tests? On a continuum from being an introvert to extrovert, everybody is on a continuum somewhere. So that's a more relational view. It's where you exist on a continuum rather than be a finite right and a finite wrong, whether you're a finite white and a finite black and all of that. We're all on a continuum. Then there's, from a linear point of view, how we know things is basically through our cognition, logic. Logic, what we think about it. Mhm. From a relational point of view, it's more affective. It's about what we feel, what we get through our emotional understanding. Just a note, if I could put one thing in the school system for kids coming up, it would be emotional intelligence, emotional competence. So it's another way of knowing. And what many folks are saying now, many of the neurologists and everybody is saying, really, the best decision making comes when we do our brain, our cognition. We let our hearts in on the problem with the emotions, and we use our guts, our intuition. When we use all three of those together, everything is integrated, that's when we make the best decisions. But that's another workshop for another day. Okay. And so from a linear point of view, there's determinism. Anybody remember B.F. Skinner? Determinism, his famous book, Beyond Freedom and Dignity, says if you give a person the right response, or the right stimulus, they will give you the response you want. It's the theory that most of our commercials are based on. You know how many commercials most of us see a day? 2,000. If you open your phone, you'll see 50. And going down the street, you'll see signs, and then trucks will go past. And most of it is based on the theory that if you get enough stimulus, that person, when that need comes up, the desire, they were going to fill it with what you wanted them to fill it with. On the relational side, it's choice or free will, of the assumption that the only thing that we really get on this planet is free will. Not to determine what happens to us, but to determine how we're going to deal with it. I've had the privilege of working in a lot of different settings, and I've at points I worked in penal institutions, and I've seen people go to jail and certainly come out twice as crazy as they went in. But I've also seen people go in jail and come out like they've been in a monastery, 2 and 3 degrees, really focused, a whole different level of understanding and integrity, doing time in the same place, but again, how you deal with it may be different. So 2 different ways of looking at the world. You figure out which one was right and which one was wrong yet? Okay, so there was a Senegalese scholar named Diop. I think it's Chia Diop, and he had what was called the 2 cradle theory. And what he said was that these worldviews evolved from the experiences of living in different environments at different times, very naturally. So he said down by the equator, where it's hot, where there's plenty of food and stuff, that a more relational view developed. People would get up early in the morning, go fishing, hunting, whatever. About 10 or 11 o'clock, they come back and they're sitting around, they're communing. They're dancing, playing drums, they're just sitting around chatting with one another, a much more relational point of view. Up the street in the Caucasus Mountains, it's a little bit different. The main difference is cold. And if you don't count, measure, store food, and work on that kind of material orientation, we don't hear about you because you don't survive. So what he's saying is these two different points of worldviews evolved kind of naturally. And both of them have place. And most of us, very few of us live exclusively in one or the other, especially as the world has opened up and become more and more integrated over time. So, but the problem comes in when one dominates as the only way, and if you're not doing this way, then something is wrong with you. And you can't be in our club, you can't play, or whatever. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Left brain, right brain, left brain, the cognitive part, the more creative part, right brain. Control and mastery versus harmony. Control, I'm going to make things be what I think they ought to be. As opposed to harmony is I'm going to flow with things. I'm going to flow in nature. Again, if you're in the Caucasus Mountains and winter's coming, you want some control. Because you got to make sure you have enough firewood, enough food, because you only have 3 months of time to plant stuff. So you have to control some stuff in order to survive. But down the street, by the equator, it's different. You can be more casual, more laid back, flow with things because it's available all year round. Now, this next one, this is an interesting one. Outcomes versus process. Outcomes versus process. So, as professionals, we all have worked, if not currently, at some point within the system where there was a heavy emphasis on outcomes, a heavy emphasis on productivity. Matter of fact, I must admit, some of us believe that we live in a system that's really not very people-oriented. A couple people said it today. It's more about wealth and power control. So outcomes, the focus on the bottom line. I remember working with clients when I was much younger, and I was feeling like I did a bad job. I remember one young man, I saw him for 3 months, but we didn't reach the goals, didn't get the outcomes that were described and whatever. Another one went to jail. And then I'm driving down the street one day and somebody was running behind the car calling my name. And I didn't recognize the voice because I'd never heard it before, right? It's this client 2 years later, and he's stopping to tell me how much he got out of me and how much valuable it was because of the process of our interaction. We didn't meet any of the goals that were described in the time like that, but it was a healthy process that he got out of. Or another one that went to jail, and I said, oh, I failed on that one. I'm playing tennis on the court. He stops me in the middle of the game. He's coming across. I said, hey. He said, I just want to thank you for da-da-da-da-da. I said, but you went to jail. He said, no, you don't understand. I was going to jail way before I met you. He said, and you don't know, but you have to have skills in jail, and you gave me skills. Mm-hmm. Oh. So, again, this is one of the things that really binds us up a lot as professionals. But I'm not suggesting that you don't do your job and get your outcomes. I'm just encouraging you to think about it this way. Render unto Caesar what Caesar's. But when it comes to your clients, it's the process that may be the most important, especially if you're dealing with people of color or indigenous populations. But I found out, my experience is it works for everybody. Finite facts versus relativity. Okay. So again, what is a fact? Is it a fact that we have different races, or is it an agreement, a constructed agreement? Is it a fact that this is Milwaukee? Or is that an agreement we have right now? Has it always been Milwaukee? Will it be called Milwaukee in 20 years from now? Or is that a social agreement? The race thing? the last 400 years, it started really in the 1600s. The 1600s, because we blame blacks and whites over as indentured servants, and then the indentured servants became kind of hard to manage. So at a point, the white ones were co-opted into the system. You're part of us. You can be a manager. When you do your time, you can get a little piece of land and whatever. It's them guys that's the problem, like that. So it became the divide and conquer. Somebody was talking about it a little while ago. Divide and conquer became the way to manage. Sometimes it's amazing to me when I remember when Obama was president, and he was trying to get the what was it, the medical thing, Obamacare through, you know, and even during that time in parts of the Deep South, Doctors Without Borders would come in, had to fly in and set up shop, and people would get services or start at 6 in the morning to stand in line to get services, just like in a so-called third world country. but at the same time, they would vote against the more progressive way to get their medical care because, you know, you're in the club. And the club means that, you know, you're better than somebody and, you know, whatever, you're different. So all I'm saying is there's more than one worldview. The clearer we are about that, where we stand, where the people we work with are, the more effective we can be. We can be. And awareness is power. Awareness gives us choices, gives us options. So we don't have to be stuck into one worldview because it supports the system. I love the way today everybody kept coming back to the system. Much of this we're talking about is about the system. And I'll tell you a not so flattering thing. The system is in all of us because we all get some benefit from the things we read and from where we get paid and the things we believe in and what we watch on TV. The system is in all of us. So part of how we deal with it is we deal with the energy that we give up. Because ultimately, everything that's physical boils down to energy, including us. And when we interact with anybody, we bring our energy to the party. So if I believe you can fly, if I believe you're competent, if I believe you're worthy, or believe those things about me, then I'm helping that to happen. What's the thing? As a man thinketh, as a man thinketh, as a woman thinketh, as a community thinketh. James Allen, classic, you know. I help create that situation by the energy that I bring to the party. Whether I'm working with one individual or I'm leading a bunch of individuals who are working with a community like that.
So just really quickly, as opposed to focusing in on what's wrong, you know, the system, right? Well, we do a couple things in our work. We have set the foundation for how we engage, how we facilitate that energy, right, to create the healing that we want to see in our communities by first understanding those lenses that we just talked about, those worldviews. And then secondly, by dismantling these systems, the racism, the oppression that exists within each of us. I would love to be a Dr. Dyson, a Dr. DeGruy. I would love to stand up and take a bet to these systems and watch them crumble. I know that that's not my ministry. That's not my calling, right? And so what is the alternative? To continue to be an agent of the system? Or to do what I can do, right, to be able to facilitate, to create change. And so for us and in our work, where there starts is with us, right? Because we are the system, because we are agents of the system, because we participate, because we benefit, we have an opportunity. Systems are made up of people. I don't know if you've heard. And so if that is to shift, it also can start with us as well, right? And so much of what we do is to start with that kind of racial healing piece. Let's dismantle what's in us. right? And then begin to build a foundation on what we know is healing and good for our folk. So, social workers, caseworkers, psychologists, even. I don't, once upon a time, our professions kind of came about very heavily rooted in medicine, right? Medicine as a means by which healing occurs. And so, what we know now that we really didn't acknowledge for so much of our years in practice that medicine is race based. Medicine is in fact one of the is part of the foundation of the systems that are used to oppress, right, and marginalize folk. And so the AMA came out in 2020, like so many of our amazing systems did, to apologize for its contributions to racism and oppression and white supremacy in the treatment of people. And so this model just demonstrates how, from its roots, this idea that your one worldview is superior, that one race, one group of people is superior, has literally and built the systems in which we rely on in our community, right? And so it just simply talks about that one notion has informed medical research, and that medical research backs up these myths that one race is superior, that others can tolerate more pain, that the how people are treated and how people can be healed is real, even though it's not, right? If anybody's ever done the scientific method, ever done a science project, we know that research can say whatever we want it to say, right? And so medical research reinforces what is taught in medical education. And so we have generations of medical providers who come out of school believing that Black people can endure more pain, that Black women can endure more pain and therefore don't need the medication, don't need pain management, don't need the same levels of care and support as other people.
They come into the medical profession believing
They come into the medical profession believing it.
Sort of important to research.
And then are certainly trained that way. And then when they come and show up to your medical room and you're having a medical emergency, provide treatment and care in such a way in their clinical practice that ultimately promotes and continues to promote health inequities, right? And so here we are today trying to figure out how do we, fix the systems. The systems aren't broken as has been shared with us today. The systems are operating exactly as they've been designed for all the purposes for which they've been designed. So there are slides and slides and slides of data here that just talk about how this race-based medicine has created so much inequity and health disparity in our communities. And we could probably go on and on and on, and I won't, because I'm sure you've seen and heard many of these statistics about access to healthcare, about poor living conditions, about poverty, about health indicators like obesity, like asthma, like hypertension, diabetes, the list goes on. We then look and shift talking to and begin to think about mental health disparity, how African American adults receive prescription medications for mental health services significantly less than their white counterparts, right? So we talked about medication prescription earlier today. We talk about mortality rates. We can talk about infant deaths to Black mothers, maternal death for Black mothers, the disparity. You guys have seen the statistics. And so when we go and begin to think about like what is it that needs to shift, we propose that it has to start with us as the practitioner, right, in our work. Because if we can't take the bat to the system necessarily and fix, right, or even dismantle those systems. We have to kind of do it from a lens of how can I show up to this work with the energy necessary to facilitate the change. And so Then we think about social work. Social work told us, I went to school over 20 years ago, and I really believed that social justice was the core value of our practice, of our work. Um, Dignity and worth of a person was critical to the healing of our communities, competence, integrity, relationship, service. So I'm like, yeah, I'm here for it. And then as I continue to learn and grow in this work, I'm confounded, right? Because all of our principles are rooted in white supremacy and in systemic oppression. And we're supposed to be the folks that are like, no, we reject that. And so it's a little confusing. The roots of social work in the United States are tied to the eugenics movement. And the theories used in social work are theories based on white, cisgender, heterosexual, patriarchal, capitalistic worldviews. All of this is to say that social work does not live up to the expressed commitment to social justice. So, can I get my money back from student loans? No? Okay. That comes from a paper talking about dismantling white supremacy in social work education. So there are characteristics of white supremacy that we see not just repeated in schools of social work, not just showing up in the premises of our work, but also showing up in the venues in which we show up as social workers, right? So all the systems that we're talking about and we've been discussing today. I won't lean into that too heavily. And I think it's important as practitioners to kind of unpack some of this, because which one is you, right? And secret, it's not just our white practitioners that I'm talking to. Part of this is acknowledging the oppression and racism that is internalized to me as well. My favorite here is worship of the written word. I thought it was winning when I could stand and learn to speak in front of people and convince you of why things should be a different way, and teach undergrads or teach graduate students, and then grade their papers and take that red marker and murder it because you can't write like I can, right? And what I've learned is that's very much rooted in how I have been indoctrinated into these systems and how that shows up not just for the social workers and students that I train, but for the people I serve, right?
If I can just comment, as a professor and teaching psych NPs in a doctoral program, what I know is you can get in the current system, you can get PhDs and all kinds of degrees, as long as you have a good memory. Because what we're not doing is teaching people to think.
Mm-hmm.
We're just teaching them to regurgitate. One of my mentors used to say, it's not a lot of thinking that goes on when it's planted,
Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry, I went backwards. So this talks about white supremacy and social work education and the things that we can do to kind of root out those principles. I won't delve into that because I want to get to the good stuff. But I do want to just sit here for just a few minutes. What is our responsibility then? We know it's there. It's been written. You've been through school. You've worked with social workers. You've been in these systems for years now. What are we going to do about it? We talk a lot about it. We've learned a lot about it. We acknowledge it. We see it's there. What is our responsibility at this level, right? At this meso type level of opportunity. So this talks about recognizing the extent to which a culture, structures, and values may oppress, marginalize, alienate, or create enhanced privilege and power. In many of the trainings we do and the certification programs we do, some of the feedback that we've gotten from folks just like you, folks just like me, is that I didn't realize how much privilege I have, right? How much privilege I have in correlation to my oppressed identities, right? We think because we have these different oppressed identities that we too are struggling and we too don't have power. And you're in this room, you live indoors, you have a degree, you get paid every 2 weeks, twice a month, maybe monthly. You have privilege. You have privilege. And so here's the thing. And this is what we call the white folk to do every day, right? Own your privilege and then utilize that, leverage that privilege, right? In service to others to dismantle this system for all of us. Gain sufficient self-awareness to eliminate the influence of personal biases and values in working with diverse groups.
If you're not clear what your biases are, what's the Harvard implicit bias test? Just take that. It'll give you more than you want to know.
Yeah. Let's see. Recognize and communicate our understanding of the importance of difference in shaping life experience. It is because we are indoctrinated into a linear worldview that insists upon competition, that yours is better or mine is worse, that you're right and this way is wrong. The idea of mandated reporting, as so amazingly put, is because we are making a judgment that your way of living, your way of parenting is inherently wrong, right? And so this is requiring us to observe people's strength, capacity, brilliance, humanity, through the difference, the variation, and uniqueness of their life experiences. Understand the forms and mechanisms of oppression and discrimination. Y'all do that. Y'all are great social workers, great service workers. Advocate for human rights and social and economic justice and engage in practices that advance social and economic justice. And so advocacy feels really big. I appreciate Dr. Dyson's speak this morning. Like, I'm never going to be on a national stage taking the bullet, right? And speaking and articulating and advocating for the masses in the same ways that he and so many others do. That's not my calling. But advocacy doesn't happen on main stages, right? Real advocacy in our communities and for our folk really do happen by sitting in their living room and figuring out how we do this in partnership and together in collaboration to support you and your family, right? And getting your needs met in the face of the oppression that exists within our systems, right? That's advocacy. That's advocacy. So how you do that has to start first with your own self-awareness and recognizing the power and privilege you do have, right? Then how you dismantle the oppression that exists within, the racism that exists within, right? And then how do you leverage that energy that you have to create the synergy with the folks you serve to really, as I say often, cook with grease, to really get the party started on the healing process for our folks.
Okay. So,
Don't fall.
okay.
Just click. Just click. Nope.
Wrong way?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay. So, real quick, one of the major issues we see in this is how our system is pathologically oriented. We are trained as professionals and socialized as citizens to look at what's wrong, look at what the glass is being half empty. So we are constantly looking at what people are not doing, and that's based on a judgment about how well they fit into the box of the gross national product. See? Our system wants all of us to think alike, to act alike, so that we can be on the assembly line of the great gross national product. So if you're deviating from that something because of your learning styles or your predominant intelligence or your experience in that, then you get labeled. You may get set in a corner and medicated, or some way you're getting the message that you are inadequate. And all of our systems at some level are based on that, are based on those pathological designations that we call diagnosis. But when it comes down to it, to tell you what I don't do well doesn't tell you anything about me. To tell you that I don't play basketball, or that I'm not good at baseball, doesn't tell you anything. To tell you that I'm good at tennis, that I played a lot of football, that tells you a little bit about me. So what we're proposing is that one of the shifts that we have to do is be more competency oriented. Maisha said it. Everybody is made uniquely. Each one of us has something to contribute. Each one of us has something special about us. I may be autistic and I don't socialize very well, but I'm very sensitive. And if you work with me on that, I can express that in a way that's not only helpful to me, but to other folks too. So that's what I'm going to peep into it just a little bit. This issue of resilience. And when I talk about this, I have to start with Robert Hill, who had a book of the Strengths of Black Families. And then 25 years later, he did another version of it. The interesting thing was, first of all, how many of you are familiar with this? Okay. So Patrick Moynihan, familiar with that name? He was in the Nixon administration, and they had to do these big studies on Black families. And they came up with all these reasons why Black families were dysfunctional, why they were not adequate, and needs weren't being met, and ... Hill came right behind him, took the exact same data, and came up with the strengths of Black families. The ones he came up with at that time, this was 1972, strong kinship bonds, a work orientation, strong work orientation, flexible family roles, achievement orientation, religious orientation. He said the families that were doing well had those things. And resilience is more than our ability to survive. It's our ability to thrive in the face of adversity. So he said the families that were making it had those things going for them. So he said, let's look at that. So he did the study in 72 and came up with those. And then he did it again in 97, 25 years later, and came up with the same thing. Same thing. Second time. So when we look at resilience, there's a researcher, Pramila Walsh, who did it with the larger population, and she came up with basically 5 issues. She said, in order for us to be resilient, we have to be able to make meaning out of stuff. Life is a school. Everything happens for a reason. If I can figure out what the reason and the message is, the lesson in it, then I can take what's going on. It can be a natural catastrophe, but there's something that happens. If I see it as just being indiscriminate and there's nothing I could do about it, I'm helpless and hopeless, nothing. But if I can say, this is a message that maybe I need to make sure I store some dry goods, or I need to make sure that I have a generator, or whatever. Or I get some lesson from it, some meaning from it, that helps me to be resilient, to bounce back and to learn from my experience. Positive outlook. Again, is the glass half empty or is it half full? You know, this is talk about discomfort. You know, all intentional change has some level of discomfort. That's why people stay into addictions, because, you know, it's comfortable. I know this, even though it's not good for me, I know this. And to go out there, I have to go back to kindergarten. I have to start all over again. But a positive outlook, when I can be optimistic, have some faith, understand that that I have some competence that will help me to deal with whatever's going on. Whatever's going on. Because again, it's not about what happens, it's about how I deal with it. Spirituality. Spirituality, and I'm not talking about religion. Religion is organized worship. I'm talking spirituality, the understanding that there's some larger reality that is there for me to relate to. Whether I call it God, whether I call it nature, universe, values, principles, but some kind of larger reality that grounds me. If I have that, then I can take a punch. You know. But if I don't have something to help me to stand up, to see I fit into a larger reality beyond the immediacy of the crisis, then it gets hard. And then she said, connectedness, social support. What's the old saying? We get by with a little help from our friends. We were talking about trauma, and we used to look at trauma as just being what happened to you. It's what didn't happen to you also. If you weren't nurtured, if you didn't feel connected, validated, affirmed in some way, that can be trauma also. So that connectedness is invaluable, part of a community. And two things, everybody wants to be good at something and a part of something. If I can't be good at something that's socially acceptable, I'm going to find something else. And I'm going to find a group to relate to who may or may not be socially acceptable. And then there's open emotional expression. Again, when we can identify our emotions and learn how to deal with them and deal with other folks' emotions, that's when we begin to benefit, because emotions are messengers. What's the dominant way we deal with emotions in our Western culture? We try to avoid them.
Push them down.
Especially us brothers. We try to avoid them. And what happens when we avoid them? We push them down, but it's like filling up your backpack. Eventually it just explodes. Something little may happen and you overreact to it because we haven't dealt with those emotions. I'm being logical. But what about what's going on in here? Yeah. So that was hers. That was hers. Then this guy named Gregory, I think his name's Henry Gregory, he did some study about 20 years ago on taking that same framework from Hill and from Walsh, but he changed the format. Instead of doing a quantitative study, he did a qualitative study, mostly with human service professionals, because it was a convenience sample. It was 9 families who had been through something. Matter of fact, at that time I was doing work with Georgetown, and one of my colleagues had come home. We had been working out in the Midwest, come home, and she found her son hanging in a tree. You know, several of them had lost adolescents to suicide. There had been a couple of deaths in the family. People had all these. One kid, 14-year-old, he was shot by some other kids. People had all these things that happened to them that were devastating. But the qualification of the study, it had to be at least a year later, that they were doing fairly decent. And so I would just interview them and say, how'd you handle all that? And that's what came out of some of these things. Once the sister who came home and her son was hanging in a tree, she said, I just remembered my aunts and my grandmothers and the people, in my family who had hardships and what they've been through and dot, dot, dot. And she had some pictures she showed me and like that. And other people tell me just remembering where they came from, how they got here, their legacy a lot of times would help them to give them strength, remembering. Other people talked about humility and gratitude, just being grateful for the time that they did have with their loved ones and having some humility and accepting that, they don't have any charge of this. Other, rituals and communion, remembering loved ones, that can be good. Dreams and clairvoyance. Nobody talked about dreams and clairvoyance in their first 2 interviews. But after they got a little more comfortable with me and things went along, people started sharing things. One sister, she was a social worker. Her son had been killed. Him and his boys were out and whatever, and he was shot. 2 things happened. First, she had a dream, because the suspicion was one of the guys shot him. First, she had a dream where he came to her and told her, no, that's not what happened. It was an accident, dot, 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 and gave us some details. Then she talked to a clairvoyant, and the clairvoyant gave her some details that matched what her son said. And she realized that it was an accident. He had the gun at the time and did it. Didn't make everything okay, but at least she knew that at that point that he wasn't taken out by one of his so-called friends. But what I learned in that is we usually get subtle messages in those things that, again, are not empirical and not scientific, but nevertheless may be important. And then there's empathy, compassion, and forgiveness. The woman whose son was killed on one of the strips in Baltimore, he was 14, shot by some guys, and she went to court with him, and she went to court, and of course she's angry, she's hurt and whatever, and then she sees the boy who's on trial for killing her son. He's about 19, her son was 14 at the time. And the first thing she noticed was he looked just like her son, just an older version. Same complexion, same build, and like that. The second thing she noticed was he was by himself. Here, a boy goes to court for murder, and nobody's with him. So she started having empathy for him and realized he was as much a victim as her son. And she took that and did something else with it. And we're going to talk about that in a second. So the issue is, those are some of the resiliency factors. If you are here, that means you have some. When your clients sit in front of you, they have some too. So the encouragement is not just to diagnose them. I work with a lot of clients now who substance abuse, jail, whatever, and they'll come in first time, we'll sit down, we'll go over all of, they'll tell me what's wrong, where they've been and whatever, where they're living. And then I ask them, I say, what you like about you? What are you good at? Huh? What you mean? And once I break it down to them, and they start to talk about what it is they're good at, say, well, music does it for me. Or I like to write. Well, I'm good with children. It starts to come out, and instead of them just keeping that negative idea about who they are, I'm helpless, I'm hopeless, I'm bad, they start to begin to see another side of themselves, that I have some strengths, I have some resilience, I have something to contribute, I have some value and some worth. And it shifts the dynamic. One of my administrative people told me the other day, she said, I'm surprised when they come out your office, they seem so lighter and happier. Okay. So anyhow, so this keys to resilience. Acknowledging loss. What you lost, whether it's an idea or something physical or a person, sense of control, that's what diversity is. But then at some level, there's an acquisitional reframe. That means we start, instead of looking at what we lost, part of the healing happens when we looked at what we gained. Universe is balanced. We may lose something, but we gain something. Again, with these families, when I started asking them, at a point with all this stuff, what did you gain? They say, well, I gained a sense of support, some vision. The woman whose son was shot, she said, I gained a mission. She started going out in the corners and finding kids and talking to them. There's always something that comes from the losses when we're open to it, and that's what you gain. And then, of course, after that, it's the part about giving back. We all feel validated when we are being of service, and we all have something to contribute to the whole. Not necessarily in a capitalist system, excuse my language, but we all have something to contribute. Maybe we just bring some humor, to our friends and family, but everybody has some value. And when we can help our people we work with see that, we are helping them to be more competent, more functional, to have hope. And it takes hope in order to fight.
I'm switching. I'm sorry. I'm changing the plan.
Okay.
I'm just going to do that real quick, and then we're going to jump.
You want to talk about cultural competence?
No, you can talk about it here. Go ahead.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Cultural competence. What's the definition of cultural competence? But the key thing is, we are not the ones who determine whether we're culturally competent. It's the people that we work for that get to say whether we're culturally competent. It requires a certain openness. It requires a certain amount of faith and courage to come out of our world and be empathetic and go into the other person's world and understand it from their point of view. And then design some interventions collectively with them. But that means we have to come out of our world and really move into the servant mode. So when we talk about an Afrocentric approach.
10 minutes so they can talk, ask questions. Just
Okay, all right.
I'm the manager.
Yes. Okay. It's a hard job, but somebody got to do
Somebody's
it.
got to do it, man.
Okay. So when we talk about Afrocentric approaches, we developed a couple of models. Actually, one is Ayurvedic and more Ayurvedic and combination of that in the structural family therapy model. Another N2 is from an Afrocentric model. It's usually about being spiritually oriented, family focused, no matter if you're working with individuals or not, there's always a family, at least emotionally tied in. Even the people that say, no, I never met my dad. Yeah, but he in there, she left me, whatever. You got feelings about that. You still connected to her. Competency-based, values-driven, holistic, and systemic. Boom. Okay. So we talked about some of these. Spiritually oriented things. Basically, we're talking about a sense of meaning and purpose. Everybody was made the way they are for a reason. And when we're looking at strengths and competencies, we're doing more of the work of trying to help them to find their place. It's not just whether you can do what functions for a capitalist society. Okay. Characteristic of effective interventionists: ability to suspend personal culture and judgment. That's the first thing we have to understand. Each one of us is a product of cultures. Each one of us is multicultural and unique in that. None of us is 0.0. None. That's one thing I love about this work with diversity and cultural competence. It's making it clear all of us are in the same pot. We are coming from a perspective. The clearer you are from that perspective, the better. Vulnerability. If you're not willing to be vulnerable, it makes it difficult to really connect.
Or have the expectation that the folks you serve then be vulnerable to you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Ability to understand from the other person's point of view, again, come out of your world and be able to go into somebody else's world. Sense of humor, we usually laugh at stuff later. If you can laugh at some of it, respectfully while it's happening, that helps. Self-awareness, biases, you could say we all have them. Ability to seek help, yes. We all need a supervision, if not formal supervision, peer supervision. We need it, and emotional competence. Emotional competence. The two pieces of emotional competence that resonate most for me as skill is being able. Go to the next one. Is being recognize your own feelings and those of others. I used to tell adolescents at a point when they go to court and for the master, I said, your job is to put him at ease. You got to put him at ease so he can feel like you are not a threat to him. Hmm? So it's about when you could soothing yourself and soothing other people. To me, are two of the two major emotional competences. But there's a whole bunch of them. Okay, so these are the two models. This is the essence of the two models that we developed. N2 basically says all people are innately good, and all people have good intentions. Mhm. And healing is a natural process. As a helper, we're the facilitator. All people want to be happy. Nobody wakes up and say, I want to be miserable, And say, and all Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when you say positive intent, we all are trying to do the same thing. We're trying to be healthy. We're trying to be worthy. We're trying to have some impact in our lives like that. Now, we may do it in some ways that aren't healthy, and we can unpack that and shift gears, and we learn things as we go along, but we're all basically trying to do the same thing. Okay.
As a practitioner, the reason why we hold on to these assumptions, because it helps us to shift our lens, right? If we can aggressively look for the good in folk, if we can connect and understand what folks are trying to do for themselves, what needs they're trying to meet, we open up the possibilities, right, of healing, of recovery, of growth, of change. We are able to better connect with folk in a way that demonstrates that, yeah, we're in the system, we're representations of a system, but we are first and foremost human, right? And what you're going through, who you are, what you need resonates with me because I see me in you, right? And so I'm able to then reframe my position and my role and my power as a partner, right? As a partner, and not as an agent of the system that is oppressive.
Okay. Good questions.
Yeah. So I just want to finalize. I just want to kind of give the overview. We've been training and certifying folks in these modalities. These modalities rooted in a relational worldview, right? That believes that healing starts inside, that believes that the relationship is and the connection is the foundation of healing, the transformation. And as of late, we were recently asked at the beginning, early in the pandemic, when it was on stage that people were being killed by the police. We finally were witnessing across the country public lynchings, if you will. Folks recognize that our systems that are supposed to be refuge, that are supposed to be supporting people in their healing processes, did not have access to people who understood who they were and where they come from and what they need. And so we began to think about, how does that happen for folk? We all are human. We all recognize and understand. We all have the same basic needs, right? So we've been, for the past 2 years, working with practitioners in upstate New York who, regardless of race, but and also specifically white folk, to unpack that, right? To uproot and dismantle the oppression, the racism that exists within, and to provide folks with actual tools and understanding that that it's not the intervention. It's not the intervention. It's not what you do. It's not the credentials. It's not the alphabet soup that we lean into, but it's you as the intervention that supplies the foundation for this healing work.
It's the energy you bring to the party.
You are the intervention.
Yes.
And so through that work, we've embarked upon what is very much a racial healing process for everybody, not just white folk, not just white clinicians or practitioners, but our Black and Indigenous people of color. And through that dismantling that is happening, that racial healing that we are experiencing as a collective, we are able then to take these tools that we know that are built on resilience, that we know are good for people, these assumptions that we know facilitate healing, and then take them into our systems and transform those systems inside out.
Okay. All right.
Questions
Yes.
for him, you know, the doctor. Thoughts? Any of this are the dots connected? Good.
Yes, ma'am.
One of the things that I find it really difficult to get white allies to hear, embody, and practice is an understanding about the way that racism hurts everyone, including them.
Absolutely.
And does it look different? Absolutely. But it's a thing that's really difficult for them to hear, embody. And so, I just would like to say to the allies in the room, it's a critical piece to see yourself, you know, in the world like everyone else, witnessing, experiencing,
Yeah.
as well as understand that it makes no good difference when allies walk around in two ways that I see very often. One is spending time feeling very guilty about all the things heard and said, and in the other way, walking around with a dagger to stab the other white people who they determine are not where they are. And neither of those things are useful, neither does not help. And so I ask allies consistently, spend time, do your work, all the things that y'all were, you know, expressing up there, do your own internal work, then collectively you can do what it is that needs to happen.
Yeah. I mean, to me, race is just a stand-in for class. You know, I mean, you can look at Europe before it started importing slaves. It was a heavy classism thing going. People were being traumatized and whatever. And divide and conquer, you know, use race to do that. But this is about, to me, this is about power and privilege. Anybody here remember Monopoly? To many ways, it seems to me, we're at the end of the Monopoly game. You know, when somebody got Boardwalk, Park Place, and the rest of us are just playing because we don't know how to get out the game. The game is really over. We don't have to tear down the system. The system is dysfunctional. It is coming down anyhow. The issue is, are we going to be a part of it? Or are we going to be a part of the new world order? No, that's the wrong language. Are we going to be a part? Are we going to be part of what's growing or part of what's dying? Because this thing is not. 1% of the people have 30 something percent of the wealth. 10% has 60 something percent of the wealth, and the other 90% of us are fighting over 30% of it. Those are 20-year-old statistics, right? So it's like the system is broken, and the politics is not going to fix it. But the hearts of people, our interactions, our energies, our willingness to be consistent with our highest values, that's going to shift. Because many systems say we're at the end. Some people talk about 4,000-year cycle. Some say a 6,000-year cycle. But the bottom line is the way we've been interacting on this planet is not sustainable. And those of us that intend to be around in one form or another, it's shifting time. Other comments, questions? So you see with some of the anti-racist responsibility, read and educate yourself, reflect, remember how you participate. Like I said, none of us is innocent. Take risks to challenge racism. Rejection is something that you'll experience as an anti-racism, and sometimes you will make mistakes and get it wrong. Oh, so we're human. We can make mistakes. And it's about relationship building. And the first relationship is our relationships with ourselves. Everybody else is just a mirror of ourselves. You know, if when you say, "Oh, I hate a liar or a thief," what am I really saying? I hate the liar or the thief that's inside of me. You know, so that's where the work has to do. It's from the inside out.
I have a personal note to add. My adult son was visiting his father. Actually, he wasn't visiting his father. He went for a job training in Atlanta, and his dad met him out there
Mhm.
just to spend some time with him because his dad lives in Florida. And it's funny, we're both Puerto Rican, his dad and I, but his dad is a very dark Puerto Rican.
Mhm.
And my son has my skin color. But my son is not ignorant like his father. And they were in an area that was not deemed in his father's eyes a good area. And his father's comment was, I can tell which ones are, I don't remember the exact word, but which ones are the bad ones and which ones are the good ones.
Mhm. Mhm.
And my son, who's very respectful and has never spoken back to his dad, literally exploded on him. And in our group text with my other children and I, he was like, I can't believe that this is my father. I can't believe that he thinks like this. And he started to ask him questions, but with an attitude. Well, tell me this. And my son said, that's not my job. If you want to learn and if you want to respect, and if in a sense, if you say who you say you are, then you do your research and you do the work. That's not my job or anybody else's job.
That's right.
And I was a proud mom.
As you should be. Yes.
And grace to his father too, because racism comes out of insecurity, and insecurity is usually based in trauma. You know, somewhere down the line, generationally. So it's like we all have a choice. Are we going to be the children or the adults? You know, because those who are making the most noise and always acting out in society, shootings and all these kind of things, these are people who are hurting inside. They're hurting inside and they can't get out of their own way. That's whether they're in Congress or they in the school doing it, you know? So we still have the responsibility not to judge anybody, but to live the highest values ourselves and be proud of our children when they do it too.
And it's contagious, right? You know, again, I think about rubber meeting the road when we take this stuff into our workplaces. The work that we've been experiencing and doing is folks are really doing the heavy lifting. They are reading, they're researching, they're dealing with their trauma, they're dealing with their experiences, and then they show up to the workplace with a different lens and a different willingness to challenge microaggressions, to advocate differently for inclusion criteria for the people they serve. They advocate differently to get the folks they serve resources. Not because it's always been the right thing to do, right? And we've all always tried to do that right thing. But when you are able to be that highest self, show up as your highest self, and really unpack the stuff that has been holding us back individually, you see things differently, you move differently, you have a different level, higher level of accountability to self first, and then to the community. Yes, ma'am.
So just I guess a thought more than anything. In the beginning, when you started out with the world view perspective, it really hit home the relational perspective. I was like, so is he just speak, are they just speaking to my personhood and how I see and navigate the world? But it really started to bring into perspective to me the differences in how folks will experience,
Mhm.
just life and they navigate. And I shifted from a practitioner, the clinical social worker, and a school social worker to now an educator. And I'm seeing that the world perspective and the differences within the world perspectives can be a barrier between my students and I. And some of it is because of the discomfort that as I introduce myself as a urban person that, I have the intellect, but I'm not coming in and speaking as an educated intellectual. I'm gonna come in and speak as me. I'm gonna speak from my experience, because my experiences have taught me and all of those things. So sometimes I feel uncomfortable, like, I'm not using the big language and stuff, but they get the point.
Yeah.
They're going out and they're passing their assessments and they're getting a license. So I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. But that fear, though, of just being uncomfortable in the space with me, and then when they're out and they're practicing, has become, it's just resonated with me. That I started to integrate that there are different worldviews.
Yeah.
You're going to be uncomfortable when you're servicing folks with a different worldview, and you need to get over it.
Yeah.
And so that's been my message. But sometimes I even second guess.
And the learning is a two-way street.
Yes.
So that's the whole cultural competence piece of it, right? The way we move through that discomfort of just the dissonance between my worldview and your worldview is to engage, is to ask questions, is to trust the person that's sitting in front of you as the authority of their culture, of their life experience, of who they are, how they are, why they are, right? That they are in charge. That's what cultural competence is, right? I was also going to add, we don't change this dynamic. We don't shift this without the comfort, without discomfort. So my conversations at the beginning of classes, we are, when we start, we are leaning into discomfort. If you aren't uncomfortable talking about all the things you were always told not to talk about, then you are in the wrong class. You're not doing it right. And start over.
And whereas we start, we have to go through our differences and honor our differences, because, the more diverse we are, the larger our solution finding pool becomes. If we all think alike, then we only come up with one set of solutions. So back to what Dr. DeGroot said at the end, it's about oneness. We're all interconnected. Our survival, our thriving on this planet depends on our ability to work together. And there's no such thing as throwaway people or trash. When people come up with eugenics and all those kind of things, they come up with that out of their insecurity, their fear. So you say, am I moving out of fear? The anticipation that I can't handle what's happening, or am I moving out of faith? The understanding that I will handle whatever it is.
Yes, ma'am. We got one more.
Yes.
I want to know how we can progress from the view of outcomes of doing, A, B, and C for being able to get your child back, let's say, right?
Yeah.
To more of like the other side that you had over here, which was more of like that community-based, that like different orientation. Like, how can we mix those two up where we can, do them progressively together so that we can have outcomes still, but at the same time still meet the person's needs and family's needs, so that we can have that family being unified.
Okay.
Because that's what we want to go to the new one, right?
Right. So that requires the individual work. That requires self-care. So I can heal through my stuff. So I can become more emotionally competent. So I'm willing to be vulnerable in the session. So I'm willing to engage and learn from the person that I'm working with. So that means I have to be, as one of my mentors said to me one time, you have to stay in shape to serve. When you get anxious, when you're tired, when you're feeling beat up, when you're feeling overwhelmed by all of the things you have to do, you probably don't get the best attention possible to your clients. But when you're in a good space, when you're feeling taken care of, rested, focused, then you're going to give more of yourself in a healthy, holistic way. So that might be, whether that means working on your sleep, your diet, some more spiritual practices, whatever, some more interpersonal interaction support. But that's about you having a treatment plan for you that helps you to be how you need to be so you can be in the best shape possible.
I just like to add, just to your points of the worldviews, we all, especially within our systems, function and operate on both worldviews, right? You can live in America and not be heavily oriented in a linear worldview. However, most of us, deep down in our core, lean into all of those different virtues of that relational worldview. And the reality is, as you really just identify, the solution is in the integration, right? The solution is in the integration. And so outcomes versus process. Do check the boxes. Check the boxes. But when you are face to face with folk, do the real work. Do the real work. I call it, type it up the way it's supposed to be typed up. Right? He says it all, render what's to Caesar, right? But when you are face to face with folk, we're gonna check all these boxes, Ms. Jones. But let's get to what do you want for you and for your family? Let's figure that out. That's where the real work happens.
We do the best work with people that we like and respect. So the first job when you start meeting with somebody is you got to find something that you can relate to with them. Something so you can start to feel good about them.
Yes.
And like I said, when you write it, you might have to write it up all pathological in order to get it funded like that. But leave that over there.
Yeah. But then get in there and do the work. Thank y'all. Go to your session. Go to the next one. Thank you so much for your time.